On January 7, 2023, 5 black police officers of the Memphis Police Department, MPD, severely beat Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black man, during a traffic stop. Nichols was hospitalized in critical condition and died 3 days later. 5 officers have been charged with second-degree murder, and the city has released video footage of officers beating Mr. Nichols. Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black man, was beaten by Memphis police officers for roughly 3 minutes on the evening of January 7, after he was stopped for what the police initially said was reckless driving. The stop escalated into a violent confrontation that ended with Mr. Nichols hospitalized in critical condition. 3 days later, he died. 5 police officers, all of whom are also black, have been fired and were charged last week with various felonies, including second-degree murder. 2 other Memphis Police Department officers and 2 sheriff's deputies have been taken off duty, and 3 fire department employees have been fired. On January 27, the city of Memphis released footage that shows officers punching, kicking, and using a baton to beat Mr. Nichols as he begs them to stop. The footage, which amounts to almost an hour and which was compiled from police body cameras and a street camera, shows parts of the traffic stop, Mr. Nichols running away, the police pursuit and, ultimately, officers beating him. The Memphis police, in an initial statement, said that a confrontation occurred as officers stopped Mr. Nichols's vehicle, and he fled. There was then another confrontation as officers arrested him, the statement said. An independent autopsy found that Mr. Nichols suffered extensive bleeding caused by a severe beating, according to preliminary findings released by his family's lawyers. On January 23, Antonio Romanucci, a lawyer for the Nichols family, stood with Mr. Nichols's mother, Rovon Wells, and said, "He was a human piñata for those police officers. Not only was it violent, it was savage." President Biden watched the entirety of the footage after its release and said in a statement that the episode was yet another painful reminder of the profound fear and trauma, the pain and the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day. Mr. Nichols's funeral was held Wednesday afternoon at the Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis. The Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy, and Vice President Kamala Harris spoke, telling Mr. Nichols's family, "The people of our country mourn with you." 5 officers, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, Emmett Martin III, Desmond Mills Jr. and Justin Smith have been charged with multiple felonies. They include second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, official misconduct and official oppression. The charge of second-degree murder alone could be punishable by up to 60 years in prison and fines of up to $50,000, even if a defendant did not strike a blow that, by itself, would have been fatal. The charges followed an internal investigation by the Memphis Police Department that found the officers used excessive force and failed to intervene or provide help. On January 20, the department announced that the officers had been fired. The officers had all joined the department between 2017 and 2020. On Monday, the department confirmed that a 6th officer, Preston Hemphill, was put on leave on the same day that the others were suspended. Some of the footage released by the city came from Mr. Hemphill's body camera, his lawyer, Lee Gerald, said. He was never present at the second scene, where officers caught up with Mr. Nichols after a brief foot chase and beat him severely, Mr. Gerald said of Mr. Hemphill, who is under investigation because of his use of a taser, according to a statement that the department released on Monday. Mr. Hemphill, who is white, has not been terminated or charged. A lawyer for Mr. Nichols's family, Ben Crump, said the news certainly begs the question why the white officer involved in this brutal attack was shielded and protected from the public eye and, to date, from sufficient discipline and accountability. A 7th officer was also suspended on the same day, the department said, but no other details have been released. Lawyers representing the other 5 officers cautioned the public against rushing to judgment. "No one out there that night intended for Tyre Nichols to die," William Massey, who is representing Mr. Martin, said. On Monday, the Memphis Fire Department said that after conducting an investigation, it had fired 3 of its employees who had responded to the scene. 2 sheriff's deputies were also relieved of duty pending an investigation, Sheriff Floyd Bonner Jr. of Shelby County said the day the footage was released. This incident was heinous, reckless, and inhumane, Cierlin Davis, the Memphis police chief, said in a video statement on January 25, the day before the officers were charged. I expect you to feel outrage in the disregard of basic human rights, as our police officers have taken an oath to do the opposite of what transpired on the video. Mr. Nichols's relatives had pushed for the officers to be charged with first-degree murder but were nonetheless encouraged by the charges that were brought. That these 5 officers are being held criminally accountable for their deadly and brutal actions gives us hope as we continue to push for justice for Tyre, Mr. Crump said in a statement. He added, "This tragedy meets the absolute definition of a needless and unnecessary death." The images, taken from body camera and street camera footage, include the initial traffic stop. Police officers come up to Mr. Nichols's car yelling with their guns raised, open his car door and pull him out of the vehicle. Mr. Nichols says that he didn't do anything. He drops to the ground, on his side, as officers surround him. He appears to offer no resistance, though he struggles as the officers hold down parts of his body and threaten him. He is pepper sprayed, and an officer fires a taser at him as Mr. Nichols gets up and runs. The video images show that, 8 minutes later, he has been pursued into a suburban neighborhood, where, close to Mr. Nichols's own home, officers begin severely beating him. They are seen kicking Mr. Nichols in the head when he is on the ground, and pulling him back up as another officer uses an extendable baton to hit him several times. Mr. Nichols does not appear to fight back throughout the beating, which ends with his falling to the ground. More officers arrive on the scene moments later, and Mr. Nichols is not seen receiving medical attention for several minutes. A New York Times analysis of the footage found the officers continued escalating force throughout the encounter, whether or not he complied with their orders. The analysis counted at least 71 commands during the approximately 13-minute period, some contradictory, asking him to show his hands as the officers held them and telling him to get on the ground while he was already lying there. The Memphis Police Department said it had disbanded a specialized police unit, known as the Scorpion Unit, on January 28. The 5 officers charged were all a part of the unit, and its suspension followed calls from Mr. Nichols's family and city activists to shut it down. Chief Davis created the unit a little more than a year ago to help address a surge of violence in the city, and designed it as a 40-officer group that deployed in neighborhoods. A large part of the idea came from hoping officers would write fewer tickets and instead seize cars from reckless drivers. The unit often operated in unmarked vehicles, making traffic stops, seizing weapons and conducting hundreds of arrests. Some residents spoke out to oppose heavy-handed tactics they experienced, especially as patrols targeted communities that were made up of poor residents and people of color. But once the video of Mr. Nichols's death emerged, the officers assigned to the unit agreed unreservedly with shutting down the unit, the police department said in a statement. It added that while the heinous actions of a few cast a cloud of dishonor on the unit, it is imperative that we, the Memphis Police Department, take proactive steps in the healing process for all impacted. Mr. Nichols worked the second shift at a FedEx facility. The shipping company is a major employer and corporate presence in Memphis. Every evening, around 7 p.m., he would return to his mother's house for his lunch break, according to his family. He had worked at FedEx for roughly 9 months. He had a 4-year-old son. He went to the same Starbucks most mornings around 8:30 a.m., his mother said. He often went to Shelby Farms, a sprawling public park just outside Memphis. He photographed sunsets and skateboarded, a passion since he was 6 his stepfather thought he had grown too old for. "You've got to put that skateboard down," Mr. Wells remembered telling Mr. Nichols not long before he died. "You've got a full-time job now." His mother said that Mr. Nichols had tattooed her name on his arm. "That made me proud," she said. Most kids don't put their mom's name. My son was a beautiful soul. Mr. Nichols told the officers during the January 7 confrontation that he just wanted to go home, and, as he was being beaten, he called out for his mother. Her home was about 100 yards away.